There's something that happens as we become reality shifters. And the first thing is that we realize that it's real. And everybody has a couple of those moments. I still go through them, actually, where I will have this awe-inspired moment where something just really, really out of the ordinary in the reality shifting bucket happens. And I will sometimes like jump up and down, or I will run my hands through my hair or over my face and almost in this disbelief and awe. And I'll say, oh my God, it works. It's real. And then what happens is this unimaginable excitement as you start to realize that the world that was shown on TV back in the day is so much more interesting, is so much more compelling. I don't know about you, but I find, especially some of the binary linear social structures, I find them to be rather mundane, like 9 to 5, although those are my client hours, which is kind of ironic because that's when I answer client emails, but I work outside of those hours too. So the prescription for how to rule your life, like back in the day, it was get a job, stay at that job for 20 years, do the best you could. Maybe you got promoted. Hopefully you did. Maybe you were just a secretary and you were locked into one position for the rest of your life. Eesh, God, how boring is that? And then you get the golden parachute and the pension and you get to retire, and then what? Finally live the life of your dreams. And seeing how the social structures are created and maintained in societies that are coming from that framework. Hey, Bob, how's the weather? Oh, it's fine. Did you go fishing this summer? Did you go up to Alaska? Did you you see any bears? Oh, yeah. I'm from small town Texas, so we would have conversations like that. The city folk have different conversations, of course, but really the patterns are the same. And for example, I was just walking around in my town today, and these two women, much older, I would say 70s, maybe even 80s, very, very wonderfully dressed, very stylish. The place that I live is very, very stylish. And so I noticed them, and they were having a conversation about somebody else. And I had this moment as I heard a piece of the conversation, and I don't know who it was about, but apparently if you get her talking, you just won't believe what comes out. And it reminds me of, and I had this reflection as I passed them, it reminds me of these structures, these social structures, where we talk about other people as almost like a pastime and a hobby. And we do so as a way to learn and grow. This is normal. But there is a point beyond that of connection that's much more deep and meaningful. And it's important that we actually observe and that we learn. And this is a big part of the shadow work journey. This is what I work with clients about, is we walk through the triggering. We understand the wound. And to do that, we have to look outside and we have to talk about what's bothering you. And then we can fix that core wound and move beyond it. And what happens, though, is that there's a certain social dynamic where people get stuck there for all of their lives. And I find that it's actually really boring after a while. because there's so much more to explore in the world. It's like, what alter world are you creating today? I'm going for a quantum society. You know what's interesting is that when I started, quantum computing wasn't even a thing. And I have literally shifted into a world where quantum frameworks are being built, quantum internet is being built, quantum computing is taking off. The technologies are incredible, and I'm so excited to see some of those designs. And those are the types of conversations that I'd love to have. It's like, what are you designing as a creator? What world are you designing? Where are you shifting to? And yes, let's talk about the shadow patterns as a modality of healing, but let's get to the higher path. Because the social dynamics, just like with work, back in the Industrial Revolution, it was completely okay to turn people into machines and then replace them with machines. Literally, this is what we did. And so we devised, not you and I, but the collective we devised these systems that actually brought in incredible efficiency, globalization, world economies, and of course it has challenges. I'm not here to criticize in this moment. I have other episodes where I do that, but I'm not doing that here. And every system is going to have drawbacks, right? And it brought actually amazing feats of development to us. The convenience and the luxury of being able to make this recording using a handheld communication device and a little plug-in microphone. And I can send it up into the cloud and it gets to you. That was the byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. Thank God it happened. But another byproduct is that we created factories and we created machines and turned people's jobs into singular dimensional roles, which stifled the creativity. Not every job, but like the blue collar jobs and the factory jobs. Those were predominant for a very long time. And then the white collar business class was created. And even some of those jobs were rather mundane, paper pushers and, box checkers and filers and typists and things of that nature. They did one thing. And that is, to me, a horrific existence. And so we have now built up a society where that is normal. And thankfully, we are shifting into a higher timeline where now we can offload some of that work that people actually don't want to do and connect more with purpose and vision and creativity and all of the things that light us up inside. But the transition is going to be a little tough sometimes and a little tenuous, and that's always the case when we step into the unknown. So there is some shaking up of the systems and infrastructures, which is required in order to get to the next path. And so when you embark on being a reality shifter and you realize that the teachings are real, that the secret is real, and you get it, you're like, wow, that's why they call it the secret, because you realize so many things and you think, oh my goodness, I've stumbled onto something that I don't know. Do other people know? It's the secret. You realize that manifestations, the principles, the law of attraction and the law of assumption and the framework surrounding that, you realize that it works, but it's actually a little more complicated than some people would have us believe. But it gets us in the door. It's kind of like when you go to a resort and you get to go for free because you go to a timeshare meeting. Raise your hand if you've ever done this. And you're like, oh, it's just a meeting and I get to go to this weekend away at this resort, and I even get breakfast. And then you go there and you're not expecting to buy anything, and you walk out with a timeshare. This actually happened to me. And then I had to revoke it. I thought that there was no way I was going to get sold on one of those. And indeed, it happened. And I freaked out afterwards. And it was myself and my partner at the time. So we sought legal advice. And anyway, so some of the manifestation teachings are like that. They get you in the door. But then you realize that you're walking out with the manifestation timeshare. And it's exciting, but it's also kind of a burden. Like you really have to be careful what you wish for, because if you have any shadow patterns active, it actually comes true. And literally, you can create the life of your dreams. So you should be very, very mindful about that. And it's sort of like also spirituality, how they get you into the door with the love and light and the gifts, and then you realize that there's all this despair after, and the dark night of the soul. And you think to yourself, wow, they did not advertise that. They didn't tell us about that part. But it's part of the whole experience in the shadow integration journey. If you're on that part of the journey, then you know what I'm talking about. We all go through it, and we go through it at our own pace and our own level of readiness. But ultimately, the goal is to get us to a higher path. And so when you realize that everything is real, it creates this amazing feeling inside. Because for me, I'm like, well, where's the boundary? What if I don't want to live in a world that I've always known? What if I want to live between 4 different roles and have different assignments and different projects or businesses, and then I shift in between? Is that possible? Like, who's controlling the back end here? Can I contribute to some of those designs? Because clearly there's a system, right? There's a system. Wait a second, there has to be a system, because if everybody's talking about it, then that means that there's a tried and true process that is published. Can we innovate it? Can we experiment? Can we have pull-out worlds? This is where my mind goes. But we can also continue to gossip. And sorry, if you like gossiping, there is some joy in that. At a certain point, there isn't, though, in my opinion. And it creeps me out. It creeps a lot of people out. So anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little off topic here. When we realize that we are the captain of this manifesting journey, and we start to realize that our wildest dreams can come true, and it doesn't always happen overnight, although for some it does, and it doesn't always happen in the way that we expect it to happen, we can actually realize that it will happen. But what's interesting is that I personally believe it's important to leave room for surprises. And particularly if you identify as having a spirit team or an entourage or your higher self that you connect with. Leaving room for surprises allows you to shift to paths that you might not have ever known that you could access. It's sort of like one of the highway ramps, when you're driving on an interstate and you're going straight and you go under these big loops and these big circles. If you are driving in your car and you stick on that one interstate and you're like, I'm going here, because this is my plan. This is what I'm going to do. And your spirit team is like, I know that is a viable option, but you have another option available to you that we might actually think is a better fit. Let us help you shift there or teleport you there, depending on what realm you're in. And then it's out of your hands. But what happens is that you have to agree and you have to consent. There are some conditions where that isn't the case, and it's always for your highest good. And that is the case. If you end up someplace that you weren't planning, it's always going to be for your highest good. So you, in this situation, are going to have a moment where you might get ejected from the car, or the road might dematerialize. I've seen this happen. Or you might just wake up in a different reality layer, and you might be discombobulated about it, and you may have some feelings about it. So, for example, sometimes I read the comments on social media posts about the Mandela effect, and I see people saying, I want to go back because they've shifted and they didn't know that they shifted until they started learning about the Mandela effect. And we have this attachment to the familiar for a lot of different reasons. And what happens is that sometimes your spirit team is actually going to shift you out of places that you need to be shifted out of. And it doesn't always have to be a disaster. It doesn't have to be an earthquake. It doesn't have to be anything that is really disruptive in your life. But you may notice that you're not where you started, and you may not be able to go back. And this is when I believe that the power of surrender is very important, because that might have been divine protection. Some people get shifted through loss, and sometimes that loss feels very devastating, particularly if they're holding on. And what is fascinating, particularly in my client work, working with those on the shadow work journey, is that very often they will hold on very, very tightly to that which they know, that which is comfortable, even if they're not happy. And then secretly inside, they will be wishing and praying that things will change. And then when things change, and it's often through some devastation and death, or getting fired, or laid off, or whatever it is, right? There's some loss. Very often, they get angry about that. Isn't that so interesting? That they'll spend 20 years begging the universe for a way out, planning and plotting. And finally, when they get that way out, they're mad. And so when we hold on to situations that are not to our benefit, then it creates this illusion. I call it an illusion of suffering, because it is. Because secretly we have been manifesting that the universe redirects us, and sometimes we don't have the strength to do it ourselves. And when the universe does, then when we feel victimized, it is an illusion of suffering. And sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and we don't always get a memo. But when we collectively manifest that we do have teams or support looking out for our best interests, then it helps even the odds, in our favor, actually in everybody's favor. And if there happens to be any confusion about that, then obviously trust your intuition. But don't let your mind trick you. The mind is so easily tricked. But if you don't know what intuition or a soul truth feels like, then feel free to reach out to me at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com if you're interested in coaching.